The old house stood on a hill overlooking the town. Dark and imposing, it had been empty for as long as anyone could remember. Locals told stories about a family lost to tragedy, stories about a malevolent presence. But the most common story, whispered from generation to generation, was about a door that should never be opened. Elias, a young writer drawn to the macabre, found himself standing before the house. He had heard the stories, dismissed them as folklore, yet here he was, compelled by an unseen force. He circled the property, each step bringing him closer to the back of the house, where the stories said the door lay hidden. A chill ran down his spine. The air grew heavy, thick with a silence that felt almost predatory. He rounded the final corner, his heart pounding in his chest. There, partially obscured by overgrown ivy, was a door. An ornate oak door, dark and foreboding, set into a wall that seemed to repel the sunlight. This was it, the last door. The orphanage had once been grand, a testament to a bygone era of elegance. Now, it was a shell, a skeleton of its former glory. Paint peeled from the walls like dead skin, and the air hung heavy with the scent of decay. He stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. Cobwebs clung to his face and dust swirled around his feet like phantom whispers. He moved deeper into the house, drawn towards the back, towards the whispered legend. Each room he passed was more desolate than the last. Toys lay scattered on the floor, frozen in time, a testament to the laughter and joy that once filled these halls. Now only silence remained, a silence so profound it felt like a living presence. He finally reached the back of the house, his breath catching in his throat. There at the end of a long, darkened hallway was a door. Not just any door. This door was different. This door hummed with an energy that seemed to vibrate deep within his bones. This was the door the story spoke of, the last door. The door was cold beneath his touch, colder than it had any right to be. The wood was rough, splintered in places. As he pushed against it, he felt a resistance, a silent refusal. The hinges groaned, a sound that sent shivers down his spine. The air grew noticeably colder as the door creaked open, revealing a darkness so complete it felt like a physical entity. He hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. Fear, primal and consuming, threatened to overwhelm him. He took a deep breath, steeling himself against the terror that threatened to consume him. This was what he had come for. This was the story he needed to tell. He stepped across the threshold, into the abyss. The door slammed shut behind him, plunging him into absolute darkness. He fumbled for a light switch, his hand closing around cold, smooth porcelain. A click, and a single, flickering bulb illuminated the room. He was in a small, dusty nursery. The nursery was frozen in time. A rocking horse stood silently in the corner, its once brightly painted surface now chipped and faded. A crib lay overturned on the floor, its tiny blankets ripped and torn. And on the far wall, a single window looked out onto the overgrown garden, its glass cracked and covered in grime. But it was the photographs that truly unsettled him. Dozens of them, lining the walls, each one more unsettling than the last. They were images of children, their eyes hollow and black, their smiles twisted into grotesque parodies of joy. He ran his fingers over the dusty surface of a nearby table, his heart pounding in his chest. The air was thick with a palpable sense of dread, a weight that pressed down on him, threatening to suffocate him. He could feel eyes on him, watching him from the shadows, their gaze cold and hungry. The silence was broken only by the sound of his own ragged breathing. He reached out to touch one of the photos, his fingers trembling slightly. As he did so, he felt a surge of cold, raw energy like a shock from a live wire. He recoiled instinctively, his heart racing. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he was not alone. The air shimmered, and for a moment he thought he saw a figure standing in the corner of the room. A tall, gaunt figure shrouded in shadows. He blinked and the figure was gone. He was losing himself in this place, he could feel it happening. The lines between reality and nightmare were blurring, and he was no longer sure which side of the mirror he stood on. He had to get out of here. Now. He turned to leave, but the door was gone. In its place was a solid wall, cold and unyielding. Panic welled up inside him, threatening to overwhelm him. He was trapped. He pounded on the wall, his fists making dull, thudding sounds against the unforgiving surface. He screamed, his voice hoarse and raw, but his cries were met with only silence. The room seemed to be closing in on him, the walls pressing closer, the air growing thick and heavy. He sank to his knees, his head spinning, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He had made a terrible mistake. He should never have opened the door. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable, but instead of the cold embrace of death, he felt something else. A pull, a gentle tug at the edges of his consciousness. He opened his eyes to find himself standing in a vast, echoing chamber. The air was filled with the whispers of 1,000 voices, a cacophony of sound that sent shivers down his spine. The floor beneath his feet was cold and hard, like polished stone. He looked around, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea where he was or how he had gotten here. The chamber was circular, its walls lined with countless mirrors. Each mirror reflected a different image, a different face. Some of the faces were smiling, their eyes twinkling with amusement. Others were twisted into expressions of fear and despair, but all of them, every single one, held his gaze with an intensity that made his blood run cold. He was surrounded by reflections of himself, each one slightly different, yet all undeniably him. He took a step back, his hand reaching out to steady himself against the wall, but as his fingers brushed against the cold, smooth surface of a mirror, he felt a shock run through his body. The image in the mirror rippled, like water disturbed by a stone, and then, slowly, it began to change. The face in the mirror, his face, contorted into an expression of pure malice. The eyes, once warm and familiar, now burned with a cold, malevolent light. He tried to look away, to break the connection, but he found himself rooted to the spot, his gaze locked on the reflection. He was staring into the abyss, and the abyss was staring back. He felt a cold dread creep into his heart, spreading through his body like a poison. This was not a reflection. This was something else, something evil. The mouth in the mirror moved, forming words that seemed to echo in the very depths of his soul. "We've been waiting for you," the reflection whispered, its voice a raspy, guttural sound. "We've been waiting for so long." He stumbled back, his mind reeling from what he was seeing, what he was hearing. The reflection in the mirror smiled, a slow, predatory stretching of lips that sent chills down his spine. He was trapped in a nightmare, he realized, a nightmare of his own making, and he had no idea how to escape. The darkness too consuming. He opened his eyes to find himself staring back at his reflection in one of the countless mirrors. But this time, there was no horror, no fear. Only a cold, empty acceptance. He was one of them now, a prisoner of this place, forever lost in the labyrinth of mirrors. The last door had claimed him, just as it had claimed countless others before him. And as he stared into the cold, dead eyes of his reflection, he knew that he would be here for eternity, a prisoner of his own reflection. The whispers continued swirling around him like a vortex of madness, but he no longer heard them as threats, he heard them as greetings. He was home. The last door had been opened and the darkness had been unleashed, and there was no closing it now.